we do a little course correction. So I at last wrap up, I was like, I barely read any books. And this month I was like, we're gonna read quite a few books. And boop. Graph time. Yeah, I read a lot of books. And you know what? They were mostly really good. Let's go. Okay, to get it out of the way, we are going to start with the one book I reread. I believe I read 8 books this month, with a range of kind of bad to brilliant. And first up is the only reread, which was The Lions of Alroussaint by Guy Gavriel Kay. You guys are probably sick of Guy Gavriel Kay at this point, unless you're one of my Guy Gavriel Kay fans who are here, in which case you're probably not sick of Guy Gavriel Kay. But there was a read-along going through on Sarah's Discord, and I was like, I want to join, because they were all having a good time, and they were posting quotes and comments about things that were happening, and I was like, I want to read it. Okay, so what did I think on reread of The Lions of Alroussaint? I would say this novel is brilliant. This is one of my favorite starts to a fantasy novel. It manages to have events happen right away while also establishing a bunch of vivid, multifaceted characters. It has gorgeous writing. It does a fantastic job of establishing the setting. It's a wild ride. Like, to start this, I was like, the first bit of chapter 1, you're like, okay, we're getting going, and then it's like, oh. And then chapter 2 is like even better, and then chapter 3 is like even better, and then chapter 4 is like even better, and it just does that all the way until like part 3. And I will say, the only reason this isn't like a 10 contender book is I think part 3 is not super engaging. I mean, it's still pretty good, I think. It's, you know what, actually, I would say it's still good, but it's, I think, clearly the weakest part of a novel, and I think if a novel is going to be a 10, all of it should be good. So the fact that it has a clearly weakest part means, like, that can't be, like, a perfect novel for me. That being said, given the story that I think was trying to be told, I don't know how you could actually fix part 3. Like, I feel like part 3 was kind of a necessary evil for what it was trying to be told, and then I love part 4, and part 5 is some of my favorite sequences in the genre, and there are bits of imagery in this book that will live with me for a long time, probably because I'm going to read this novel a bunch, but even if I didn't, it would be the case. And it's like there are images in this novel that stand out so vividly that if there was a Lions of Alroussaint adaptation, I would be so pedantic. I would be like, they would have to get imagery correct for it to be considered a faithful adaptation, because it's so good. It also, not just on that level, it has amazing banter and is hilarious at times. It has a character who just gets by, like, based on charm. Like, he's just able to be written as just so charming, and it's thematically rich. I'm giving it the same score, 9.5 out of 10, with like 4 10 out of 10 parts, and one like 7.5, 8 out of 10 part. Okay. That's it for rereads. Now we're going to change in tone a little bit to The Daughter of the Moon. We're going now for non-rereads, and my least favorite book of the month was Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan, a book I don't have. I had physically. I've already given it away because the cover is gorgeous. The cover is annoyingly gorgeous, because it makes people like, oh, I should read this. This looks really good. And then it tricks you with its start, because like the writing is pretty lyrical. I don't know if the writing passes the Abercrombie test. Actually, the writing definitely doesn't pass the Abercrombie test, which is it true? Like, it has some metaphors, like the stars look like blah 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 blah, poetic stuff, and it made me really go with the writing quite a few times. Like, does it though? That being said, it's kind of fits the setting, so I'll give the writing a pass and think the writing itself is generally quite good. And, like, the idea for a setting of, like, the characters all being based on immortals from Chinese mythology sounds really cool, because conceptually and aesthetically, the setting is really cool. The problem is that, like, the setting doesn't actually contribute anything to the narrative. Like, it's the plot of every romance ever, And I'll point out, Ursula K. Le Guin has like a short story novella, I forget which, probably just a short story, in Earthsea that is the plot of every romance ever, but in a fantasy setting. And I didn't like that. If Ursula K. Le Guin wasn't going to make me like it, Sue Lin Tan did not have a chance, because Sue Lin Tan is not Ursula K. Le Guin. And it could have been cool if, like, them being immortals played a role in the story, but not only did the characters being immortal not play a role in the story, it often, like, just created plot holes because the writer made them, seems like they made them immortal and then just forgot they were immortal for the rest of the book. I will say, I will grant, this is not a book for me. And if you enjoy romance novels, you'll probably enjoy this. Because, you know, presumably, but I just don't. Like, if you go out, not like romance and fantasy, or like fantasy where there's a fantasy plot and then the romance is key. Like, if you like just romance novels, then you'll probably like this. I don't know, though. I don't have an example of, like, a really popular romance novel. So maybe it's bad as... But, I mean, presumably other people like it. So, presumably, if you like romance novels, you'll probably like this. If you don't, you'll probably think what I do. The characters are... They're not very... I was trying to find depth the entire time. I could not. Most of the enjoyment is just like, are they gonna hook up? They're not that complicated as people. And the protagonist is really, like, annoying at times. I don't know why the guy likes her. It's a romance. I don't know why the guy likes her. Also, you know when I was just like, this book ends, I'm not about to spoil it, I'm just going to say, like, very vaguely, conceptually what it does. It ends with a quote that's like, you're all children and we need to tell you what the moral of the story is. Which not only is just, like, insulting. Like, I just read the book. If you can sum up your moral in one sentence, you shouldn't have written a book. You should have written, like, a short story or an essay. But not only is that just like, why are you doing this? This is not a children's story, allegedly. But also, like, the moral of the story doesn't fit with the novel. Like, it'd be like if you read an Abercrombie book and then got to the end and it's like, it ends with, like, the moral of the story is that as long as you, like, stick to friendship, you'll be victorious. I'm just like, what? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Anyway, it's aesthetically cool. But it being aesthetically cool only makes it more disappointing due to its complete lack of substance. 4 out of 10. Okay. We're moving on to Binti by... Oh, I'm going to butcher that. I should have Googled how to... I'm not even going to try and say it. By that name. This is a sci-fi novella that I guess was pretty good. I wish it was a novel. It also had some really cool ideas. But unlike with Daughter of the Moon Goddess... those ideas were actually, like, important to the plot and pushed the plot. And it was conceptually, like, very imaginative and very interesting. My problem is, basically, I would have enjoyed it if it was longer. And there's a couple specific reasons, things that I felt, if they'd been expanded on, I would have found it to be a much more complete and satisfying narrative. There's basically a group of friends that normally, like, their friendship would have been shown. It would have been, like, I don't know, 100 pages, 20 pages, an amount of pages. Instead it was like 2 sentences. We were just told, like, they became good friends. And I was just like, okay. And I wasn't emotionally invested in those people or that friendship at all because I was literally told, like, they're good friends now. And I was like, okay. And also there's something that happens in this book that really feels like protagonist should care about. It should be pretty significant. And then, like, as soon as it's not, it would be inconvenient for the plot. It's just like, no, we're not gonna worry about this. So it was slightly carried by imagination, but I'm giving this a 6 out of 10. It felt thin. Like I want if I had a novel, not a long novel, but like this is like 80 pages, like a 240 page novel, 200 page novel, with this plot from this writer, who I think is a good writer. Not, you know. I don't think, you know, Guy Gavrier or Hobb or Erickson or anyone is shaking in their boots like this person's going to take over the genre and be way better than me. But I think, you know, author's talented and good at what she's doing. And I would probably give it a higher score, but as a novella, I think it's a 6. Okay, now we're going to have a similar jump up to Black Company. She is the Darkness by Glenn Cook. This would be one I'm more mixed on. And by more mixed, I don't mean I liked it less than the other Black Company books. I mean it had higher highs and lower lows. Like, there was a bigger standard deviation between my enjoyance of scenes. There were some of the absolute coolest moments in the entire series. Some of the best twists. and some of the craziest stuff, and some just really cool stuff. But a lot of this novel relied on a storytelling method that made events just feel kind of distant. So I think I really enjoyed it, but I could see this being very frustrating if someone had like a lower baseline enjoyment of the characters and world. So I gave it 8.1 out of 10, but if you didn't like it, I understand. And if you really like it, I also understand. It would be kind of lower middle of the pack among the Black Company books, which means I liked it quite a bit. Okay, next up. Grace of Kings. I have a review for this on the channel, and I recorded the review, and then I uploaded it, and I was like, oh crap, I forgot about this. So now's my chance. I forgot to mention in my review that I love the way like the in-world deities interact with the story in this. I want to leave it and not say more about this, but I thought that was really cool. And I thought this was a really enjoyable novel. This is sweeping. This literally, like my thumbnail, my kind of moderately clickbaity, but I don't think it's clickbaity because it's what I talked about, and it's true. I think if you literally just like wrote down the plot points of this novel, and you wrote down like just the individual plot beats for like the first 3 novels of A Song of Ice and Fire, this probably has more plot points than like a 600-page novel. It is sweeping. It covers a ridiculous amount of stuff, and it manages to stay very coherent while doing so, and at times had me like turning the pages and not knowing what time it is because I just read like 100 pages without checking. It did have a couple things that hold this back from being a 5-star for me. It being that sweeping and zoomed out did leave some things being emotionally distant. And I said this about the dialogue. There were dialogue scenes that I just didn't feel like how people talked. It felt like the summary of a conversation where this is what I said in the review. It's like, imagine you had a conversation with someone and you talked about something, and then you went back and someone asked you like, oh, what were you talking about it? And you were to summarize that. When you summarize that conversation, it would be much shorter. It'd be much more to the point. You wouldn't cover anything that got repetitive. That's how the dialogue felt. It felt like people were conveying information so efficiently that it didn't feel like people talked. But this this wasn't a deal breaker for me. This is just what stopped it from being a 5-star novel. So still solid 4, 8.2 out of 10. Moving on. Next up, Claw the Conciliator by Gene Wolfe. Creative genius. I saw someone say this and I'm stealing it from them. Hi, Amanda. Shelf Unstable. Funny channel. The fact that a human was able to write this is still pretty mind-blowing. Severin is a really interesting character, and the world is completely bizarre and unique. This is, it's like way, way, way in the future, and it's written from the perspective of someone who wrote an accounting of a part of their life like they were writing it for people who also lived eons in the future, and then it got translated by the author to our language. But the author refused to make up new words. So, like, if you look at the cover of the second half, that thing with horns and, like, sharp teeth and, like, these, like, weird feet is not a horse. But we don't have a word for this. So Gene Wolfe is just like, this is a horse. And this is done with, like, everything. Like, not all, like, animals, scene-setting stuff, plant life, people, beings they run into, would be like, this is a horse. And you figure out, as you read, that, oh my, this isn't a horse. While also just having some absolutely bizarre stuff and some compelling storytelling. The thing that held this back from me liking it as much as Shadow and Claw, as much as Shadow of the Torturer, because I did like it less, was that there were 2 chapters in this book, and I'll note the chapters were pretty short. I think they were probably combined a good, 15 pages. It was one of the chapters was the longest chapter in the book, but the chapters in this book is generally like 4 pages, where I literally had no idea what was happening. And a lot of the time, it's like, in a lot of the chapters, like, the base story is pretty easy to figure out. It's just finding all the details that's extraordinarily difficult. This was like, I read them, and if you come and ask me, like, oh, what just happened in the chapter you read, I would have been like, I have no idea. So I feel like I can't, like, just from an enjoyment standpoint, that has to lower it. I'm sure those 2 chapters, like, for people on their 30th reread of Book of the New Sun, they could tell me that those chapters are genius. But I would say that a lot of the genius of, so far, The Sword of the Lictor and Shadow of the Torturer and the rest of Claw is that the chapters can be genius on 34th reread and enjoyable the first time. And these, like, the first time I was just like, especially the last chapter, I was just like, what the ever-loving crap. Anyways, that being said, I'm sure if you read this 30 times, the 2 chapters I like the least by far are, like, some of the best. But anyway, yeah. So, 8.6 out of 10. It's genius. I just enjoyed it slightly less. Okay. Next up, Water Sleeps by Glenn Cook. This is my favorite Black Company book to date. I can understand if you have it lower, because the kind of goal of the main character of the novel doesn't feel like a complete goal. It's like, we need to get this done so that we can have soldiers live. The last book happened. That being said, I think it was the most emotionally resonant book in the entire series. I also think it was the most thematically rich, and there's various different, like, narrators, because these, what we're reading, it's like the annals of the Black Company, the people who, like, write down what happens for the Black Company, and all the analysts have, like, a slightly different writing style, and this is my favorite prose style of any of the Black Company books. It also, I think, conceptually has some of the most creatively brilliant reveals and concepts, and probably does more to push this up my ranking of my favorite worlds. So, yeah, I loved it. I gave it a 9.1 out of 10. Water sleeps and the enemy never rests. Soldiers live and wonder why. Okay, I'm so excited for Soldiers Live. I'm really excited to get to the end of this series. Anyways, and next up, because that is not quite my book of the month, we have my book of the month for a good month, not including rereads or else Lions win. But it wouldn't have put up that much of a fighting chance, but still, this book is really, really good. You ready for this? Beating all those is what's technically considered a YA book by publishers, but it's a YA book that pulls less punches than some grimdark novels I've read, and that is The Knife of Never Letting Go by Patrick Ness. I believe there was a hype train for this book. That hype train just ended about 10 years ago, and my goal is to restart the hype train. The setting and mysteries and concepts and things like sci-fi stuff going on at the start of this book is one of the most brilliant hooks that I've encountered. It instantly had me interested in, like, I needed answers to, like, 8 things, and also I was interested in, like, multiple characters. Does such a good job at having the protagonist describe things in a way that feels natural to the setting and not info dumpy, instead of, like, explaining things. Instead of explaining, like, oh yeah, and this isn't a spoiler, this is, like, the first sentence is that he can hear his dog talk. And then he's not just like, oh, I can hear my dog talk because of this. He's just like, dog talks and describe, this is what the dog says, and then you figure out what's going on as it goes. This book is also, like, the pacing of this book is, like, it's so good. It's paced perfectly. Events are constantly moving without feeling rushed. It has vivid and interesting characters. A command of the writing style. It's obviously not super dense. It is, like, a YA book. I think the reason it's considered a YA book is the protagonist. One of the protagonist's internal conflict is that where he lives, it's like you officially become a man at, like, 14, although whatever. And he's like, this is in 20-something days. And, like, he's, like, kind of worrying about that. So it's a YA book, but it's brilliant. It's whatever. And also the character is, like, mostly illiterate, where it's kind of like, he can kind of read. He read the sentence, he turns his back. It'd be like, hey, turns, his, back. So he can so he spells some things wrong. And Patrick Ness has managed to do something that I would not think was possible. He is a protagonist who spells things wrong that does not make me want to throw the book across the room. Take that, Brent Weeks. Oh, every other time I've encountered this, I'm just like, just spell things normally. But, like, it wasn't frustrating because I could still tell what he was trying to say. This book also has an antagonist. It's one of the most, like, hateable antagonists I've run into. Like, an antagonist who I just want to, like, grab their head and just, like, slam it through a cinder block over and over again until, I won't just... amazing tension. And it also this book had a moment that I would consider truly beautiful. You should read it. So, that's what I'm ending on. Knife of Never Letting Go. I'm going to give it a 9.3. It sounds like the way I described it should be higher. There are a couple things that it's kind of hard to talk about, or one thing, basically, that slightly hold it back, which I would describe as maybe... there's an internal conflict that was ever so slightly... But, like, the most ridiculous of nitpicks hold this back from being higher, because 9.3 means there wasn't much I can say about it that was bad, because this novel ruled. Also, if you like novels, actually this is true for Water Sleeps as well, if you like novels that like name drops of the title drops in novels, this is some of the best ones. For like the series name, obviously I said them for Water Sleeps. Those books are both, and actually the Brook of the New Sun ones. Grace of Kings as well, actually. And Lions of Alroussaint. Yeah, all the good books I read have really good title drop. The best ones are Knife of Never Letting Go and Water Sleeps. The title drop for the series is, if you like those, this is a particularly good one. Anyway, that is it. Let me know if you have read any of these and what you read in the month of September of 2022. Also worth noting, usually I just go off the cuff. This time I did have notes written down, and I'm curious, did it feel more coherent? Did you notice a difference, or would you have never known if I hadn't told you? And do you think it's worth the effort for me to keep doing it? Because I normally don't do that. I normally just go, and I'm like, this is the books. I'll figure it out as I go along. This time I had stuff written down for each. I'm curious if you think that made a difference. Let me know in the comments. I'm curious to hear. Have you read any of those books? Do you completely disagree? Do you agree? And do you plan to read any of those? And what did you read in the month of September? And what was, if you're gonna, or I want to know one of those following things, or just what your favorite book was for September, or a book you read in September that you think I would really like. Hope you enjoyed the video, everyone. Have a nice day.